Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Fitness Center for Creative Arts in beautiful downtown Hamilton, Ohio. My name is Ian Mackenzie Thurley. I'm the Executive Director and your host for today as we have the dulcet tones of the hurricane and tornado sirens going. Fortunately, we are fortunate enough to be living here in Ohio and avoiding those challenges beset by our fellow Americans down in Florida. We certainly send our love and good wishes to all of them, and to the incident management team from Butler County is now down there serving in Florida, and we really appreciate all they are doing, and thank you very much to them. Hopefully we'll have them back safe and sound soon. Great pleasure to welcome you here for One City, One Book, the Daughters of Yalta event for our Celebrating Self. That's the Catherine Grace Katz. And we all got to see a book. Everybody got a book. Who got a book? Hands in the air. Got a book? Ooh, if somebody's, I see a book. If you've read a book, pass it on. We've got our good friends here from One City, One Book back again. We're so excited. It's a great read, and it's a great thing to be a part of. Lots of things going on again through the end of the month, but I will tell you about that very soon. But we're very excited to have Debbie Harms and Dr. Ralph Gutowski here to speak today. Big round of applause to Tom Caper there, playing a little bit of guitar over our lunch. We appreciate it. Tom's a bit of a Batman. When you, if you go down to the Fitton Cinema, you see that beautiful cinema screen and stereo sound we have down in our theater. That is also Tom Caper's handiwork, and his team will be out there doing all the technical work for Operation Pumpkin this weekend. So fantastic. We appreciate it. With that, I would like to thank the City of Hamilton, the Hamilton Community Foundation, the Ohio Arts Council, and Artsway for their continued support of the Fitton Center and Arts in Hamilton. Please give them a round of applause. To our series sponsor, Miss Kathy Klink, thank you so much. Great to have you here. We appreciate it. Media partners, our good friends there for TV Hamilton, we appreciate everything you do. You'll see them everywhere with those cameras and supporting so many things around Hamilton and the community. And last but not least, give them a round of applause. Absolutely. Take a bow. Our incredible catering partners in Two Women in a Kitchen for the fantastic lunch. Yeah. Make sure they can hear that back in the kitchen. They are absolutely superb. I have to tell this story. Last Friday, the Friday before, we had Fit and Family Fridays, which was digging up Dessa, which is about dinosaur bones. And Kirsten and the team had made individual grilled cheeses for these kids in the shape of bones. That's the thing. That's where they go to. So we're certainly very, very appreciative for everything they do. Lots to see and do here in Hamilton. Obviously, we're at Operation Pumpkin all this weekend. You'll see the Fitness Center there all day Saturday and Sunday, I should say. We got a selfie station and lots of fun things going on there, and lots of entertainment. And at the Fitness Center, we have Sleepy Hollow coming up for Fit and Family Friday. Our Bravissimo Broadway on Saturday, the 22nd of October. If you don't have your tickets for that, please get in. That's going to be an incredible show. We have a trio coming in, the Empire Trio, direct from New York City, not to be missed. But here we are today, fantastic crowd for One City, One Book for the Daughters of Yalta and Catherine Grace Katz, who will be speaking here in Hamilton in just a few weeks. But I would like to say thank you to Kathy Creighton and our good friends over at the Butler County Historical Society. They've been a fantastic partner with us, as always, in helping to put all this together. And also to Gary Steelman as well on our staff, because trying to find spies in Butler County was harder than you thought, but it's like a bus. You get one and two come along. So we're so excited to have Ralph Gutowski speaking here, and Ralph is from formerly of the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. And also we have Debbie Harms, who is the daughter of Alfred R. Zugerer, and he is going to speak on the experience of her father, who is a World War II Ritchie boy. I might put in an extra plug there for Dr. Al Miller, who will be here next month, coming on his 100th birthday, who also was a Ritchie boy. And as you'll hear, this was not something that these gentlemen kept on their sleeves. So we're so excited when we were told that we were getting Daughters of Yalta, and I heard the word espionage and intrigue. As a kid who didn't read Tolkien, as a kid I read John le Carré novels as a 12-year-old, so that was really my bag. So I heard the word spy and my ears pricked up. But to hear about the stories of these these men and women who have served our country, particularly those who got themselves well out of harm's way and turned right around and went back in again in the service of this great nation, is absolutely incredible. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage Debbie Harms.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Zugaher Harms. Let me begin by saying I was a child who never quit asking questions. As a teenager, I pestered my father to pieces, and he finally sat down with me and told me where he'd been stationed during the war, along with a watered-down explanation of what he had done. I wrote everything down that he said, but it was very watered down. And I kept the paper. I still have the paper. I had always been aware that my father had been stationed at Camp Ritchie. I knew he had been there for a while. I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. I really owe a great thanks to Dr. Miller, who's going to be speaking next month, and his son, Randy, because I went to school with him, and Randy, when I mentioned Camp Ritchie, Randy said, "Wow, you really need to do a lot of research." So I did everything I possibly could. I read everything I could get my hands on, and then my sister and I sat and went through box after box of papers and records and everything we could find, postcards. And we found out a lot about what my father did. It was kind of a newfound version of our father and what made him the man he was. So today I'm honored to be speaking to you on behalf of my father, Alfred Robert Zugaher, who was born December 17th, 1920 in Schwetzingen, Germany. At the age of 10 and 30, he immigrated to, which I should go back to that, I'm sorry. He immigrated to Oconomowoc, Wisconsin with his parents and his older sister. He ended up losing a whole year of schooling due to the language barrier, and he had to put some effort into learning a whole new language. In 1935, his father was offered a job here in Hamilton at the Baldwin Lima Hamilton Company, and they took the position, moved here. He went to Wilson Junior High School, graduated from Hamilton High in 1940. Shortly thereafter, he enrolled at the University of Cincinnati to study engineering. In October of 1942, he entered the Signal Corps Training School in Cincinnati as a radio mechanic learner. I've never heard it called that before, but that was the Army logo. And in November of that year, he married our mother, Norma Kepler. They began their lives together, and he was with the Signal Corps. They sent him to Fort Hays in Columbus in February of 1943. And then in March, he was supposed to be at Fort Hays for a while, but then in March, he was actually called to active duty, and he reported to Camp Crowder, Missouri for basic training. Now, before I go any further, I do want to explain a few facts about Camp Ritchie. In June of 1942, the government began recruiting immigrants, children of immigrants, refugees, and others with specialized skills for a new military intelligence group. They were trained in the hills of Maryland at Camp Ritchie. It was a rigorous training, and it was really pretty unique in that they were trained in photo interpretation, terrain analysis, counterintelligence, espionage, signal intelligence, map making, intelligence gathering, and close combat. They were trained in POW interrogation, and the techniques they used had to meet standards of the Geneva Convention. They could not touch a prisoner. They could, however, use trickery and scare tactics. Over the history of Camp Ritchie, in 31 classes, 15,000 men and women entered the camp, with only 11,637 completing the training. They were multilingual. They were expected to memorize German command structure, including updating individual commanders if they were killed or if they were captured. They had to know this because they used it in interrogation. This was really an interesting fact that I found, was the minimum IQ was 110. The highest IQ was 150, but out of those 11,637 people, the average IQ was 127. These were very smart people. So this is Camp Crowder. I missed that. I'm so sorry. And again, these are just travel orders on his way to Camp Ritchie and just different things, different postcards about Camp Ritchie. They had some fun while they were there too. That's our dad. So, this has just proved where they were and what days he was there from his bank account, so, or his and my mother's. This was when we knew that he got his orders to leave Camp Ritchie, because it's very faint up here, but it says August 10th. They sent the telegram to our grandparents saying, don't come, we're being moved again. So that's kind of where we're at with that. When he left Camp Ritchie, he went to, whoops, I hit the wrong button, I'm so sorry. I'm not good at this, yes. He went to Fort Custer and was assigned to an escort guard company in Battle Creek, Michigan. Then to Camp Ellis in Champaign, because they wanted to enroll him in the University of, wait a minute, I am so sorry. They enrolled him in the University of Illinois. That was called the, actually it was called the, shoot, I just lost it, my brain. The West Point, I'm sorry, it was called the West Point of the Midwest. So it became a very, very heavily Army-run university during that time. At the time he was there, he finally received his naturalization papers, which is a long time, because he came over when he was 10. It was a really important thing that he was to get those, because if he were to be captured overseas, they could shoot him for treason if he was still listed as a German citizen. So this actually did happen to a couple of the Ritchie boys in the Battle of the Bulge. So he returned to Fort Custer, where I'm supposed to be, as an interpreter and a darkroom attendant. I was not aware that Fort Custer had actually become a POW camp, and that they had 5,000 German POWs in Battle Creek, Michigan, that they were processing. So he stayed there for a while, and then he got his orders to, this is his darkroom attendant, he got his orders that he was going overseas. So in June, he headed to Camp Shanks, New York, set sail for Europe. He arrived in Europe on July 14th of 1944. He served at camps in England, Burton on the, I don't know what this is doing. Here, Burton on the Hill, Morton in the Marsh, Stratford upon Avon. Then he was sent to London. And we still aren't sure exactly what this is about. The weeks of July 26th and August 4th, he and 6 other men were assigned to the Provost Marshal General Office in London for detached duty. Now, I did check into this. Dad was the only Ritchie boy in the group. This was actually a counterintelligence office. And at one point, I did read where that office was in dire need of linguists to translate documents. This I'm still researching. He returned to Burton on the Hill and then was sent over to France through the Normandy beachhead. First place they stopped was St. Lo. This has actually had pretty profound impact on Dad because of the devastation. He had never seen that kind of devastation before. He did talk about St. Lo. Very few things he could talk about because everything was classified. This was a horrible battle. Just so you know, it was like 12 days long, and there were approximately 100,000 people killed and injured there. So it was a horrible, horrible battle. He went to Rennes, and see, that was back a page, now forward a page. Shoot, more destruction. I'm sorry. He went to Rennes. I'll just tell you, he went through France, from Rennes into, golly, I can't think, Saint-Thégonic, Morlaix, and Brest. This is just some of what they saw This is their caravan. These are his pictures, actually. You can see the map here where he followed through. When he was in those places, he was processing prisoners. That I have from the paper he and I talked about. This is actually a copy of the card of capture for prisoners. So I have some of those copies, actual copies of the empty cards, which I was really excited about. He went back to Rennes because they were having problems with the Free French. So basically all of the pictures we have, this is just a prisoner of war envelope, but you can see with the prisoners, their pants are stamped with POW. These are actually processing pictures that Dad took. Here they're putting up a fence, building some barricades and such. And that's our father there with on the left here with the 4 prisoners sitting. This was his Christmas card for December of '44. His little adopted dog was called Pissy Sis, so. Let's see, okay, some more. He always headed up a lot of his letters and postcards with somewhere in France because he wasn't allowed to tell anybody where he was. So that's him coming out of a foxhole, sitting up here on the balcony. And that's actually his barracks because I blew it up enough that I could see a picture of my sister because she had a baby picture and my mother. So yes, it's all somewhere in France. Now, the only major story that our dad told us that actually had a name and a personality attached. He befriended a POW from Hamburg by the name of Hans Martens. Hans confided in Dad that he felt guilty. He was receiving more meat in one meal than his wife and his daughter would eat in a week. He felt very bad about that. In talking, they discovered that Hans, actually, his home was just a couple of blocks away from my father's grandparents. And he sent a letter to his wife to find out how the Zugehörs were after a major bombing. And the wife replied that their home had been leveled, but they were safe. Not only that, but they were rebuilding their home brick by brick by themselves. They were in their 70s. Dad was able to pass the information back to his father so that he knew that his dad was okay. Hans was a bit of an artist, and Dad would get him cigarettes and pencils and paper. And he asked our father for a picture that Dad carried of our mother. He created this beautiful pencil drawing of our mom, and he caught Dad in whatever light was available and did that. Before he left Camp Ballistic, which was up near Le Havre, Hans gave Dad his 2 portraits and a pencil rendering of a small section of the camp, and those are over here on the table today if you'd like to take a look at them. When he got back to the States, he bounced from Camp Shanks to, which is in New York, to Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, Addersbury, Indiana. He went back to Camp Crowder, and then to Camp Bullis. He hated Camp Bullis. That's down in San Antonio. He then went to Fort Sam Houston to regroup for a Japanese prisoner of war processing duty. And while he was there, he served as a prisoner chasing escort for U.S. military who had gone AWOL. Not a fun job. He made trips to Mexico and other locations to retrieve the prisoners. He was honorably discharged in November of 1945 and came home to Hamilton to settle into his family life and worked in retail. I always tried to urge him to make friends, join a veterans group, and he would just grumble and say, I can't. Well, I didn't really realize it until I started reading. He really couldn't. The majority of the Ritchie boys were, well, they were all, encouraged not to join groups because what they knew was classified. They couldn't talk about it. So, until it was declassified 50 years later. So he died carrying most of his stories to the grave. Approximately 60% of the Army intelligence gathered during the European front came from the Ritchie boys. They were a pretty phenomenal group. In the words of my 9-year-old grandson, "Grammy, your dad was some kind of hero." He was right. So, Alfred Robert Zuger, technician, 5th grade, 161st Military Police Prisoner of War Processing Company, United States Army. You're truly a hero. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you so much to your father for his service. You can see right here as a display that has been set up and is now in the ownership of the Butler County Historical Society. There is his uniform, cap bags, and much of the paraphernalia that he carried with him throughout Europe and back here to the United States. So if you'd like time to come and see that, please do, and get some photos, chat a little bit more to Debbie. And of course, all of that is on display on the beautiful Historical Society building, which is on North 2nd Street, the most beautiful and most wonderful street in all of Hamilton. They often compliment their neighbors. She's nodding? Okay, good. We're moving on. Thank you so much for that story. Obviously, when we were talking about the Second World War and truly espionage and those techniques, and then talking and working with prisoners, that was the Second World War was that basis for what was the war to come, without a shot being fired, which was the Cold War. And if you go into Yalta and all of that and the history of that, not just the book, but and some incredible history coming out of that time, that friends became slightly estranged, and we ended up in the Cold War with our good Russian cousins, and a big part of that was the new nuclear deterrent. I'd love to say today that we were well past that, but apparently we're not. Quite unfortunate, but here we are. But to speak on that on great terms is Dr. Ralph Gutowski, who's formerly of the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. And he's going to offer us the insights of an actual intelligence officer. So we're going to do a little swap round of some video here, and I'm going to welcome Dr. Gutowski to the stage. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well enough? I'm going to move this away because I'm using a microphone on the side. Debbie, thank you so much. Those of you who have lived in the Hamilton or Oxford area for some time may recognize the name John Doleboys. John E. Doleboys was vice president for alumni affairs at Miami. But what a lot of people don't realize was that in 1931, he and his father emigrated to the United States from Luxembourg, and in World War II, he was recruited and served as a Ritchie boy, doing the same kind of work that Debbie described her father doing.
I'm going to have to ask the intelligence officer, I need your password for your computer. What would you like?
I could give you my password, but then I'd have to...
Well, talk amongst yourselves. I knew he wasn't going to tell me.
Welcomed by an air raid siren. I don't know. So John Doleboy was, by the way, appointed as ambassador to Luxembourg by President George Herbert Walker Bush, and was part of those wonderful ranks. Okay, Ian, this does not come from my allotted 20 minutes, okay? With the Ritchie boys, we're familiar with espionage that's known in the community as human intelligence, individual people gathering the intelligence personally. There are also other forms of intelligence in the scientific and technical area. Radient, using radars, SIGINT, using signals, acoustant, and other forms of telemetry. And my experience was in this kind of scientific and technical intelligence. And thank you very much for inviting me today. With dropping the microphone and the computer and everything, I really can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. So it's my personal story about intelligence work and gathering during the Cold War, specifically the 1960s and 1970s. My first duty assignment as a second lieutenant in the Air Force was as a space weapons officer in Colorado Springs, Colorado, home of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex. And this is where I was assigned to work. It's 9,750 feet high, and the underground, secret at that time, underground command post, as you can see, was about halfway up from the foot of the mountain. Drove up from Fort Carson, Colorado, and the entrance, see if my laser is going to work. Was right here was the portal. You parked it there and went through security. And on the way up, you were under pretty much constant surveillance for the 10, 12-minute drive up there. And when they say use of deadly force is authorized, they really meant it. Now, a close look at the portal and the security gate that we would have to go through before going into work is shown here. And I want to point out that a lot of people thought that this was just the portal that went into the command post, but in reality, that was a tunnel completely through the mountain, and it was shaped in the shape of a boomerang. And the command post was where the boomerang made its curve. And on this end, you can see the tunnel portal is pretty well round. On the other end, it was very narrow and tall, like a crevice tool for a vacuum cleaner. And you say, well, why that? Well, because we were pretty sure that we were the #1 target of a Soviet missile strike, and they would set off a nuclear blast right in front of this. And when they did, having a tunnel that curved in the shape of a boomerang with different sides ducted the pressures from a nuclear attack through that tunnel. So we really worked off the curve of the tunnel in the combat in the underground command post. Here we'll take a little tour inside. And we went in, by the way, the Air Force buses ran every few minutes, and you could ride the bus in. But there were times we didn't want to wait. We just walked the mile inside or back out. The colonels, the generals, the admirals, they rode in covered golf carts. So this is during the construction phase in the early 1960s. You can see when I worked there were 3 buildings that were 3 stories tall. Now there are at least 7 buildings. The buildings stand on, you'll see another picture of coil springs to minimize damage during shock. But here's part of the construction that went on to build it. And you see this boat in here. There is a 3 million gallon lake of diesel fuel to keep the generators going, and a 5 million gallon lake of water for drinking. As I'll mention in a moment, we had to survive in there for 30 days if necessary. So here's a picture of them building one of the 3-story buildings, a part of that building under construction. And here's an Air Force technician inspecting the coil springs, and you see these big shock absorbers on each side, which were used to dampen the motion in case there was a nuclear attack on the mountain. Well, this is how it was going into work. Colorado, beautiful sunshine, 360 days a year like this, and we would go into work. It was like working in a mine, if you will. And at that time, none of it was finished inside. The bus would come into a turnaround where it could turn and go back out, and these were the blast doors that led into where we worked. Each one was 3 feet thick, 80 tons in stainless steel. And as you can see here, it had pins. These pins would go into the holes on either side. And if you look through here, you'll see a second blast door. Yes, there were 2 of them with a cavern in between. And during times of high alert, only 1 door was open at a time. So you had to get, if you were due at work at 8 o'clock, you better be there at 7:30, get through security, get in the mountain. 1 door would be open. You'd go into the cavern. The other would swing shut. The pins would all go out. And then they would open the inner door, and then you could walk into the complex where we worked. Now, an interesting story was, as you'll see in a few minutes, I was responsible for a system that was, its purpose was to detect for launches of sea-launched ballistic missiles against the United States. And we had 7 sites, as you'll see in a minute, where we did the surveillance for that. And I had a commanders conference where I called all the commanders in, and we had a meeting about our system. And I thought, what better thing to take them up and show them? I mean, this is the output of that system comes right here, and it goes then to Strategic Air Command, the National Command Authority, and the Pentagon, the White House. How better to impress them? So we got there, and it was an evening tour, about 7 or 8 at night. We went inside, and that door swung shut. And when that door closes and you're in that chamber, there's a sound like you've never heard before in your life of finality and totality. And it just resonates in there, and those pins close, and the other door broke. And we were in there about an hour and a half while technicians worked on the hydraulics to get the other door open. There is an escape system, which was a 3-foot tunnel that went down and then up, filled with sand, and they gave you an army shovel about this long. So fortunately, we didn't have to do that. This is just a picture of the diesel generators. They had a sign there that said, without electricity, it's just another cave. But we were supposed to survive and operate for 30 days, buttoned up. Inside, we had a small hospital, a mess hall or chow hall. It was not like this. A chapel, laundry, barbershop, gym, fire department, everything you would need to live and exist for 30 days underground. Let me see, I don't want to leave anything out of from my notes here. It was tested once a year, called Operation Button Up. And it was supposed to be no notice, because if a nuclear attack came, you wouldn't have more than a half an hour's warning. So, but the rumor would get out. Get ready, we're having Button Up. It was a once-a-year affair. Tell your wives, your spouses, you may come to work someday and not be home for 30 days. So get your bills paid, do whatever you have to do, because this is what may happen. But keep your eyes on the door, because when you see the admirals and generals heading for the door and all the golf carts around the door, you know Button Up is coming. Now, inside there were back in the 60s, 3 mission centers. Depicted in the top right is the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, BMUS, and there was a space track, the Space Defense Center, which tracked all Earth-orbiting objects, all satellites, and there was the Combat Operations Center, which was the heart of the nerve center, and it had British, Canadian. It had naval admirals, U.S. generals, and I say foreign officers there as well. And then there was a whole plethora of communications and computer people who were there to support these operations. Now, just because you had access to the mountain and to one of these areas didn't mean you had access to everywhere. Every place had its own special pass and special badge. And the Combat Operations Center was the most secure of everything in the facility. And when I got to Colorado Springs, and I was among a first group of physicists, astrophysicists, aero engineers, mathematicians, we got there and we didn't have security clearances. So we couldn't go into the mountain or go into these places. And we were held in what was called the leper colony at the flatlands in Colorado Springs until the clearance came through. And there were 37 generals on active duty in Colorado Springs at this time. And one of them's wife said, you know, I think the wives would really be beneficial for them to know what's going on in there and why when their husbands come home they smell like diesel fuel and have headaches and all that. We ought to take them up there. Don't you think so? And the general said, yes, dear. And so the Wives Club took all the wives up for a tour, and my wife got to tour the Combat Operations Center before I was cleared to get in there. And I came home and I said, what was it like? She says, I don't know, a lot of screens. That's all I can tell you. A lot of screens. Now, the ballistic missile early warning system was one of our key lines of defense. And as you can see here, there was a site in Clear, Alaska, at Clear Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Thule, Greenland, and then Fylingdales Moors in the United Kingdom. And they all reported directly to the Ballistic Missile Early Warning Station in Colorado Springs. And I worked for a colonel who had been the operations officer up there, and he really took a shine to me and liked me. And he said, you know, of all the sites, that's the best one. We're going to send you up there. And it was unaccompanied. Your spouses couldn't go to these places. And so I got orders for Clear, Alaska. And we lived on base, and I worked for a 2-star general at the time, and his wife picked up my wife to go to the Wives Club, and she said, isn't this such a nice day here in Colorado Springs? Don't you love it? And my wife said, yeah, we're really going to miss it. Well, what do you mean? Well, Ralph's got orders for Clear, Alaska. We're going to have to leave. What? Why, we can't have that. You're such an asset to the Wives Club. I'm going to talk to Oris, my husband, not Oris, and we'll change that. So my orders were canceled. Not once, not twice, but 13 times. The colonel put my orders in for Clear, and 13 times they were canceled. I knew you ladies would love that. Now, this is what the site at Thule looked like. It consisted of 4 detection radars. We call these fans, that looked over the poles of the United States to where the Russian missiles would come from. Now, to give you an idea of the size, each one of these is a little larger than a football field laid on side. Okay, and it would detect the Soviet missile, and then a tracking radar, 65-foot tracking radar in here would pick up the missile and track it. By the way, this picture was taken July 4th on a sunny day in Thule, Greenland. That was a laugh, by the way. All right, I'm not going to go through all the details of this except to say there were problems in that BMUs only gave us 20 minutes warning. And that's because if the radars were located here, whoops, almost went off the edge. Ignore this red line. They only have line of sight and don't look over the horizon. So they're projecting over the pole, and the Russian missile ignites here, goes through boost phase, burns out, and it goes in this ballistic trajectory you see over here, and they're only detected a third or maybe even more through their trajectory, and then the warning, the tracker gets on it, calculates launch coordinates, impact coordinates, and then picks up the next one and the next one. And so at best, we had, or on average, 20-minute warning of a Soviet missile attack against the United States. And 20 minutes is not a lot of time to respond or to run for cover. I'm going to come back to that problem in a moment, because in 1968, I was sent on 4 hours' notice to Los Angeles Air Force Station. Literally, the general called my boss and said, "You got a kid working for you named Gutowski?" "Yep. I want him in Los Angeles Monday to start working." "How long?" "At least 6 months." My boss said, "Ain't going to happen. I'm not letting him go." He said to my boss, "John, you either let him go or I'm going to have 4-star General Commander of NORAD call." 20 minutes later, the general from NORAD was on the phone. I called Rosemary, and this was in January. We had just gotten back from visiting family in Pennsylvania. I said, and our luggage was lost, and it went to Seattle. They delivered it that morning. I said, "Don't unpack it. We're going to Los Angeles tomorrow morning." And in a raging blizzard, we left Colorado Springs with the studded mud and snow tires headed for Los Angeles. And we arrived there on Super Bowl Sunday with studded tires going down the freeway. And we were like Okies going in there. I was sent there along with 5 other individuals to a place the Air Force called the West Coast Study Facility, where they brought people in to study problems and solve them and then go back to their institutions. It's where the whole ballistic missile program in the United States was founded. That's why it's named after Bernard Shriver, who was the head of that program. And what we did was our study was to write the blueprint, the master plan for space surveillance for the Air Force for the next decade. We called it SOS-70, Surveillance of Objects in Space in the 1970s. And one of the outcomes of that effort was to get rid of the line of sight problem that the ballistic missile warning system had, and you had with any ground-based radar, by using satellite-based technology. But right after I got back to Colorado Springs, they sent me to the Middle East on a year's unaccompanied. So I was supposed to go to Alaska, right? Now they send me to the Middle East in the shadow of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark rests, to collect scientific and technical intelligence on Soviet space and missile system operations. And I couldn't help but include this was a grasshopper in there, and I could never see that without thinking of the biblical plagues of locusts. And those dudes were not these little tobacco-spitting dudes we have around here. They were huge, and they could snap a pencil right off. But anyway, when I returned to headquarters, Colorado Springs, I was given responsibility for the tactical operation of a brand new system designed to detect and warn of attacks on the United States homeland from ballistic missile launched from Soviet submarines in the Atlantic and Pacific and the Gulf. And so there were Yankee-class submarines with 16 SSN-6s, Delta-class submarines with 12 to 6 SSN-8 missiles, and we had these 7 sites in Maine, North Carolina, Florida, Laredo, Texas, Mount Laguna right behind San Diego, just north of San Francisco, and Mount Tamalpais and Mount Hebo. And these 7 sites used their radars to put out, what you see this shadowy area was where the radar coverage was. And what it did is it forced the submarines further out than their missiles could fly and impact the continental United States. Otherwise, there was only 3 to 5 minutes warning. So it was the commanders of these sites that I got trapped in Cheyenne Mountain at the Commanders Conference. Meanwhile, while I was overseas and in this job, developing tactical control doctrine for the Sea-Launched Ballistic Missile Detection and Warning System, the Air Force was actually building the systems we recommended in that master plan that we had put together in Los Angeles. And so out of that came what is known as the Defense Support Program. These satellites were roughly the size of a bus, were put in geostationary orbit, which means they were put 22,200 miles above the Earth in an orbit that moves the same speed as the Earth, so they sit over the same line of longitude as the Earth turns, and they're more or less stationary over that point. And we could position these so that these satellites' purpose was to see the missile the moment it lit up, track it through the boost phase, generate the launch coordinates and the impact point, and send the missile. Maximum warning time for our National Command Authority. And now, because the system was based in space, we were able to deploy these over this hemisphere and protect us against sea-launched ballistic missile attacks, seeing the missile from the moment it broke water until in through its flight. And I got to tell you that these pictures, a picture like this, was highly classified. We couldn't even have them on the walls of the building in which we operated in case somebody had a heart attack and we had to have a first responder in there, or some emergency took place and an uncleared person had to come in. So even the pictures of them were unclassified. So, and by the way, Ian, this depicts a satellite here, and there was a relay or readout station. Woomera, Australia, was one of those spots. Not the garden spot of Australia either, okay? 6, 7 years ago, I walked into the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson, and I walked into the Space Gallery, and I couldn't believe there was a DSP satellite sitting there on display. And you can still see it there. The solar panels are folded up. This is a 2-story walk around, so you get the idea. This actually is not a satellite intended for orbit, but they used it. One company built the spacecraft, which carried it, and another company built a sensor package, and they had to go through an integration thing of, does everything match up? Does, is it going to fit? Is it going to work together before we put it on orbit? And that's what is on display there now. And this is next to a Thor missile. So you can go and see those, see this satellite up there on full display. So after I finished my active duty commitment to the Air Force, I remained employed in a civilian capacity and took technical responsibility for the DSP mission software in a facility known as the MPF, the multi-purpose facility. So you can get a lot of information at Defense Support, multi-purpose facility. Who knows what's going on there, right? I've read that the DSP system has even been used to assist the Iron Dome anti-missile system deployed in Israel's national defense. And I can tell you now all this information because DSP program has completed its full mission with all the satellites a few years ago, and it's been replaced by more modern technology. Now, Ian said be sure to leave time for questions. So you can ask questions, but I got to tell you that if I give you the answer, then I may have to. However, I didn't know how my time was running. I have a few more slides. Can I do these?
You can, and I'm going to give a microphone here to Debbie as well. And we're going to ask some questions to everyone.
I have a few more slides if you want me to go for another 5 minutes on the satellite reconnaissance program that I was involved with. Yes or no? Do you want to quit here or? Yeah? Okay. The others, you wake up that person beside you and they can let us know. All right. This will be kind of quick. This is about the top secret reconnaissance satellites during my time in the Cold War. And you say, well, why did we do this? Why did we go to this trouble? No more Pearl Harbors. We didn't want surprise like that ever again. And Gary Powers had been shot down in the U-2. And so we wanted to go higher than they could shoot down a U-2 airplane. And we had this thing, there was a missile race, a missile gap. Who was ahead? Who had them? Who didn't? The only way to find out for sure was to spy from space with reconnaissance satellites. And then we had this strategic arms limitation treaty, and the satellites helped us confidently verify arms control agreements and track outcomes. You remember, trust but verify. And so we were the verify part. I'm going to just quickly go through this. These satellites were launched mainly on Titan III rockets from Vandenberg Air Force Base. The rocket would put it on station in orbit. Once it was in orbit, low Earth orbits generally, as you'll see, the Air Force Satellite Test Center at Sunnyvale would send commands. It would do its imaging on film. And then we had to get the film back. So periodically, they would kick out a canister of film, which we would catch in midair. And here's a picture, here we go, of that actually happening. It would, with its trapeze on the back of the airplane, would reel it into the airplane. They would actually start developing it, flying back to the ground station. So by the time they got back, the imagery was already developed. And the Air Force Satellite Test Center at Sunnyvale was on Moffett Naval Air Station, Navy. And I would go there, and I would call the visiting officers' quarters to make reservations. Captain Ralph Gutowski. And I would get there to this Naval Air Station. See, a captain in the Air Force is pretty low. Second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain. Captain in the Navy, they're right under an admiral. So I'd go walking in, Captain Gutowski from my quarter. You're an Air Force captain? Yeah, I had the plushest quarters. I had the finest little bar in the room and everything. I figured they owed it to me. Okay, the first satellite I'm going to talk about is called the Gambit 1, or KH-7. There's been a lot in the news about classified information, and especially special intelligence compartments. You've been hearing about these documents the FBI has recently come in. Compartmented means this information is in very tightly controlled silos. What's going on here? Okay. Listen, if you're listening to me in Washington, turn it off. So I'm going to make this real quick. So you have to be introduced to a person in person in an accredited facility, and you can only use the code word in that facility with somebody you have personally been introduced to the program. And so the key word for this program was keyhole. We were looking in the keyhole with these satellites. So this was the KH-7. It flew at 63 to 67, about 38 missions, average mission 6.6 days. It had one film canister in the nose, and there was about 3,000 feet of film, 9.5 inches wide. And it identified Soviet missiles in silos, and objects on the ground 2 to 3 feet across could be seen in the photos. And this is the Severodvinsk Naval Shipyard, and an unclassified picture from that. The KH-8, or Gambit 3, flew from 66 to 84, 54 missions, averaged 31 days a mission. little over 2 miles of film on board, 5 inches and 9 inches. At first it had one capsule, then 2 capsules, and it could see objects in the ground less than 2 feet across. And it is followed by, oh, here's a picture. I'll never forget the morning I sat in the commander's morning intelligence briefing at headquarters NORAD, and they actually put this picture up taken in March of 1968 of a new Soviet submarine, of a new vehicle that we didn't know what it was. We called it the Caspian Sea Monster. 30 years later, this was unclassified, but we found out that what they were building was this craft that you see pictured here with 8 jet engines. It's called the Lun Ikranoplan in Russian. Okay, along came the KH-9 or the hexagon system. It's 30 or 60 feet long, 10 feet wide, stereo panoramic cameras. So using stereo, we could get 3D. It has 4 film recovery canisters, and it weighed 15 tons, putting it up there. And here's a picture of it. But of interesting here of its work, was on board 60 miles of film in that satellite. Okay, and it had 4 return vehicles. What was the resolution? Pretty good. So here we have the cameras, and by the way, these pictures all come from the National Museum of the Air Force at Wright-Patt. These 3 satellites are on display on loan from the National Reconnaissance Office if you ever want to go and see them and learn more about them. This is the camera system, and this is an unclassified image. This picture up here is blown up from there, from here, those 2. But now looking at that same Severodvinsk site, this is picture was declassified after 30 years. This is the enormous Typhoon class Soviet ballistic missile submarine. It's so big that they have a swimming pool on board this submarine. So there you have my little portion of this. Thank you for allowing me to serve you and serve the country. And Deborah and I will take questions.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Debbie. We've got questions for Debbie or Ralph. Do we have questions? I've got one right over here. You're not allowed to ask her a question.
Ralph, I have a question for you.
Just be careful.
I'm going to.
'Cause if I answer
So all
it-
you have to do is shake your head yes or no. Since Mosler and Hamilton built the blast doors at Greenbrier, built Fort Knox, which is nothing but a Mosler safe with bricks around it, is Cheyenne Mountain, by any chance, have a Hamilton connection?
I can't answer that. Because I don't know.
You don't know.
Questions? I saw some hands over here. Questions? Oh, yeah.
Debbie, how did your parents meet?
They met in high school, and they hated each other. He was the class clown, she thought, and a smart aleck, and she was snobbish.
I'm good, thanks.
And they got,
Appreciate it.
when he went to the university, she was going to school and working in Cincinnati. He was going to school and working in Cincinnati, and they shared bus rides home. So they got to know each other, and that's what happened.
Fantastic. Questions up the back? I see some hands. No? You're all so quiet. It's the meatloaf. You're all well fed.
All right, this situation yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, with Japan and North Korea, is who warned Japan and how did they get that information, or do you have to shoot me?
Cheyenne Mountain was closed about, I'm going to roughly say about 6 years ago, because we really didn't have a problem. And it's been reopened and reactivated about 3 years ago. There are now 7 buildings, and added to the mission. You know, we took this mission out of the Air Force, and it's now the Space Force, and added to it is the whole cyber security issue. And I'm going to say, without knowing for certain, it came through those channels that it went to our allies and partners around the world, NATO and others. There's a very, 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 very strong threat we don't talk about from China. Okay? And we can't ignore that. And so I can't say more about that other than we're watching. We're vigilant.
All right. Any other questions? One down here. It's going to make me get my steps in today. Good stuff.
I'll go back and walk that. I've worked on several Air Force systems that I saw their sunset. You know, every one of those has a sunset date. And felt, my gosh, how could we throw this away because it was so good? And now, and this is what I'd like you to comment on, the B-52 is what, 60 years old or maybe more, and they are retrofitting that with today's technology so it can still fly. You have a comment on that?
Well, I can speak to the satellite program that I was involved with, DSP. When you're building a program like that, when you're building that kind of hardware, those satellites, you put together a team and facilities, and you build out the whole program, however many satellites, and I'm not going to say how many satellites, 20 satellites that it was, but you build it out while you have the team assembled, and then we stored those satellites in nitrogen-filled bags until we needed them. Because you can't say, oh, run down to the 7-Eleven, we need a few more if something happens to one on orbit. So we stored those. Well, it turns out they were so well built, they lasted 3 times longer individually than what we had projected. So much so that the technology, the electronics, the optics in the sensor package, we had new technology we hadn't even dreamt of in the late 1960s. They took them out of storage and retrofitted them, and that's what they're doing with the B-52s, adding this new technology to them, hardening them, upgrading them, so that the program life cycle was tripled. Only one of these was launched from a shuttle, by the way, and you know when those went out, the last one, they had other missions added, and so to get more money out of them and improve them, that continued to happen. And that happens with other weapon systems that have mission viability. So you'll probably see B-52s for a while. To keep them from deteriorating, to protect the components, to give them, it's an inert gas, okay, and it, you know, the seals, the rubber, vulcanized technology, you want to protect that, make it last as long. These are built in clean rooms where everybody has, you know, spacesuits on and such as they're being built. One company built a spacecraft. We used a company that was excellent in building spacecraft. That was their stock and trade. And they could build a spacecraft like nobody else. And then different sensors packages. When I left this and I went to the National Air Intelligence Center, my responsibility was for long-range planning for technical sensor acquisition by the Air Force for what we're going to put to ride on these satellites for the mission that's there. We got some smart ladies and smart men in this country and in our military, and there's a lot going on that you just aren't covered by CBS, NBC, you know. And yeah, I'm proud of them.
Well, Dr. Gutowski, Debbie Holmes, thank you so much, and thank you to your father. We appreciate your service, Doctor, and to your father. Thank you so much. Now, I had some notes to talk about upcoming events, but the spy who was last at the table here took all my notes. Seriously, they're gone. So I know there is an event this coming Thursday, downtown Hamilton, with our good friends at Miami, dealing with Ukraine, which is incredibly pertinent right now. And our author will be speaking. Oh no, here comes my notes. Good. Here's my, see, I had it and everything. All right, there we go. We're back in action. So our author, Catherine Grace Katz, who is the author of Daughters of Yalta, will be Thursday, October 20 at Miami Hamilton's Parish Auditorium with the book Daughters of Yalta, and shines light on three remarkable women, Anna Roosevelt, Sarah Churchill, and Kathleen Harriman, and their vital role in the 1945 Yalta Conference that determined the fate of Europe and the world. There will be a book signing and a reception to follow. So hop online to Miami Regionals here. They're doing some great programming. I have some good friends here. That's this coming week on the Thursday, and then October 20th to meet the author, Catherine Grace Katz. Well, it's been fantastic to have our incredible speakers today, incredible history right here in Butler County and those great connections. And to our friends at One City, One Book, thank you for another great read this year. We're looking forward to next year. We look forward to seeing you at the Fitton Center again very soon. We have Dr. Al Miller for Celebrating Self. Spooky season around with us for Fitton Family Friday, and of course Bravissimo Broadway coming up here at the Fitton. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again very soon.